And then once the page is reloaded, I'm going to select our sign up with Google button here. And that's going to redirect us through to our Google account here. Hello, my name is Lachlan Kirkwood, and today I'll be teaching you how to add your own Google authentication within your Bubble application. Throughout this process, there's just a few little specific details involved, so I'm going to be sure to explain everything in as much detail as I can. Let's open up a Bubble editor, and I can start walking you through the process. Over in my Bubble editor, I've just created a sample user registration page that I'll be using throughout our tutorial today. And on this page, it currently just includes a few input forms if a user would like to register an account with an email. But we'll also be building out an additional button below this that will just prompt a user to log in or sign up with an existing Google account. And in order to do that, I'll first need to install the free Google authentication plugin. So if I jump over to the plugins tab on the left-hand menu here, I'm going to choose to add an additional plugin into my editor here. And I'm just going to type in the word Google. And the plugin that we'll be installing today is just the plain Google plugin, which is a free plugin, as I mentioned, built by Bubble. I'll just choose to install that into my editor, and then I can close the plugin library here. And the first thing you'll notice is that we'll just be required to source some API keys within the settings of this plugin. And that just allows this plugin to actually speak with Google itself. So that way we can not only log a user into their Google account, but we can also pull any data that they have stored within their account. So things like their name or their profile photo. And in order to source the API keys to make this plugin functional, we'll just need to head over to the Google Developer Console. Now I'll be sure to include a link to this within the description of the video. But if you'd like the URL now, it's just console.cloud.google.com. And this is just essentially a developer portal for any Google products. So if you ever find yourself needing to use services like Google Maps, you're more than likely going to have to create a Google developer account in order to get access to those features. Now, when you create an account, you'll just need to sign in with your personal or business Gmail account. I'm just currently logged into my own personal Gmail. And the first thing I'll need to do once I'm into my developer account is create a new project to work within. So I'm going to head up to the toggle at the top of my page here, which just prompts me to select a project. Now I already have a list of projects from previous tutorials that I've created, but today I'd just like to show you how to create a new project from scratch, just so that way you can follow the exact step-by-step instructions you need. So I'm going to choose to create a new project here. And then I'll need to provide a name for this project. I'm just going to call this Building with Bubble Google Auth Test. By all means, you can call this whatever the name of your application is. I'll then choose to create this project. And once that project's been created, I'm going to select this project. And that will now open this up within my developer portal. And now we'll see the home page of our project dashboard, which just displays a list of all of the services and API documentation we need to implement any of those Google services. What I'm interested in doing though is sourcing an API key for the authentication service. And so in order to do that, I'm just going to scroll down on the left-hand menu under the product section here. And then I'm going to click on the API and services option. And I'll be selecting the credentials tab here. And now this is going to open up a dashboard that will display all of the API keys you have sourced for this particular project. Because we've just created a brand new project, there is of course no APIs within this. So what we'll need to do is create a new authentication API. And to do that, we'll just head up to the Create Credentials button here. And instead of adding just an API key, I'm going to create a ZeroAuth client ID. So this will allow us to create the Google authentication experience we're after today. So I'll select this. And what you'll see now is that in order to create the authentication API, we'll first need to configure the consent screen of our application. And now the consent screen is what Google will display when a user needs to log in through the Google service. So essentially, if someone's currently on your registration page within your application, and then they click the sign in with Google button, they're going to be redirected through to a page that's hosted by Google, and that's going to allow them to validate their own Google account that they'd like to log in with. And that is the consent screen that we'll need to configure. So we'll normally need to add the name of our application and sometimes even just a logo of the application that's trying to get access to a user's account. And so we'll just need to quickly configure this consent screen here. And from this menu, I'm going to choose that the type of consent screen will be an external option, because I want users who aren't within an internal organization to be able to log into my application. If you're building, let's say, like an internal project management tool for teams, you might select the internal option. But if you're building anything else like a social network, a marketplace, or any other application, you're more than likely going to be needing to choose the external option here. I'll then choose to create my consent screen. And now what you'll see is just a preview of what this consent screen is going to look like. And we'll also need to add in the corresponding information that Google requires us here. So the first thing we'll need to do is add in an application name. I'm going to call this Building with Bubble, as if it's the actual application itself. You'll then need to choose a support email, and this will normally be linked to whatever email you've logged in with when you created your Google developer account. And then from here, I'm going to upload an app logo. And then once I've uploaded my logo, we'll also just need to add in some information about the domain of our application. And then the first thing I'll need to add in is just the URL to the home page of my application. And now in most cases, this will normally be the index page within your Bubble editor. So if I open up my editor and choose to open the index page, I'm then going to choose to preview this page. And then I'm going to grab the URL here. I'll jump back into my Google Developer Console. I will paste that in. And the only thing I'm going to change on this URL is that I'm just going to remove the parameter which opens up the debugger within our Bubble app. That's just something we use internally within Bubble just to display the debugger at the bottom of our preview. But I'm not going to need that within the actual registered URL for the homepage of my application. From here, we're then going to need to add in a link to our privacy policy. And now if you don't yet have a dedicated page set up for a privacy policy, there's no need to stress. What you can do is just paste in the same URL. And from the beginning of the URL parameter, you can just add another /, and then you can just type in the word policy. And then that's going to verify with Google that you do have a page that is dedicated to a privacy policy. And later on, if you are to create that page, you can just make sure the page itself is called policy. So that way it's hosted on the same URL. And then I'm going to paste in the link one last time for the terms of service link. And then I'm going to once again just remove the URL parameter, add a /. And in this instance, I'm going to call this page TOS for terms of service. And then if I scroll on down, I'll just need to authorize the domain itself. And this domain is as it's printed above. So it's just bubbleapps.io because that is where the preview of our application is currently being hosted. So if you look at the URL structure here, it'll normally have the name of your application followed by bubbleapps.io, which is the actual root domain itself. I'm just going to copy that across, but if you'd like, you can just print it as it's spelled above here. I'll just paste that in and that will now verify that URL. And then finally, I'm just going to add in my email address here as the developer contact information. I'll just add that in. Perfect. And now I can choose to save and continue. And at this point, I won't need to add any scopes into my application. So I'm just going to save and continue once again. One thing I would just like to point out now is that Google allows you to pre-approve a list of test users who can actually log in through the Google authentication while your project is in the development mode. So because our Bubble application is still currently being hosted on the Bubble domain, the application isn't actually in live mode. Normally, once you are ready to publish your application, you'll put it on a custom domain, and that will allow it to become live. And so because we are currently viewing our application within the development mode, we're just going to need to approve which users can log into their Gmail account. And as you can see, we can add up to 100 people within this pre-approved list. I would recommend at least adding in your own email address, because what you'll find is that if you don't add any pre-approved test users now, when you later go to try and use the Google authentication login, it won't actually work because the account you're trying to log into isn't added to the pre-approved list of users. And of course, once you actually publish your application into the live mode, you won't need to worry about this, because of course it'd be impossible to later on have to approve every single user that registers for your application. So you'll only need to do this while you're actually developing your application itself. And so for now, I'm going to add a new user, and I'll just be required to add in the Google email address that they will be using. So I'm once again just going to add in my own personal email address. I will add me to the project, and then I can choose to close this tab here. And then from here, I'm going to choose to save and continue. And then I'll just need to verify the summary here, and then select to go back to my Google Developer Dashboard. And now that we've taken the time to set up our consent screen, we can finally go and grab the API keys we need in order to make the Google plugin functional. So if we once again head over to the credentials tab here, I'm going to then go up to the button to create new credentials. I will once again be selecting my OAuth client ID. And now you'll see we have the option to start the process of fetching our API keys. And so the first thing we'll need to do is validate what type of application we'll be building today. And we're going to be selecting from the web application option, because Bubble is great for building web apps. And then for the name of this application, I'm just going to call this the same name that I had before. I'll call it Building with Bubble. And then the very last thing I'll need to do is add in an authorized redirect URI. And if you remember before, I'd mentioned that on our registration page within our application, I'll just open this up within my editor. We're going to add a sign up with Google button onto this page. And when a user clicks that button, they're going to be redirected through to a Google hosted page where they can actually log into their Google account. But once Google has validated that account, we'll need to point the user to be redirected back through to our registration page here. And that is the purpose of adding a redirect URL here. It's just the link that Google will send a user back to once they've validated their account. So I'm going to choose to add a redirect URI. And now the link for this will be the actual link of our registration page. So I'll choose to preview this within my Bubble application, because I will need to fetch this URL here, and then I'm going to paste that within this field. And one thing I would just like to note is that you will just need to remove the debugger URL parameter once again. And then once we've added in that URL, we can choose to create our authentication API keys. And now it will display our API keys on our pop-up here. And I'm going to start by copying across our client ID. And then I can jump back into our Bubble editor, open up our plugins tab. So I'll paste that into our development field as well as our live field here. I would normally recommend creating a separate authentication key for your live environment, because once you publish your application on a custom domain, the redirect URL is obviously going to be different from the URL on our development page. But for the sake of our tutorial today, I won't actually be able to run the workflows unless I add in an API key into both of these fields here. So I'm also just going to add my dev keys into the live fields for now. But as I mentioned, be sure to create a separate set of API keys for your live version once you publish it on a custom domain. But from here, what I'll need to do is just grab my app secret keys. So I'm going to jump back into my developer console. I'll copy across my client secret key, and I'll paste that into both fields there. And now it's time to build out the workflows necessary in order to make this login experience functional. And now you can just choose to add in a button onto the page if you'd like. But I'm just going to quickly show you how to create a custom button that looks like the traditional sign in with Google button itself. And a great alternative for creating buttons is to just use group elements. They actually have the same behavior and triggers as buttons. So I'm going to head to my containers menu here. I'll just choose to add a group onto my page. And then I'm going to choose to just remove the style of this group. I'll set the background color to be a flat color. And I just have a blue color code here that resembles the login with Google color. If you'd like that, it's 05A2F0. And while I'm here, I'm just going to update the roundness of the borders to be 5. And then I'm going to add a text element into this button. And this will just say sign up with Google. And I would like to open up my rich text editor, highlight this text, bold the formatting of it. I'll save that. And then I'll update the color of this text to be white. So I'm going to remove the style here. And then I will just set the color code to be white. Also need to just expand that out so all of the text fits there. And then I'll just reduce the height and width of the actual element itself to fit nicely around the text. And then the very last thing I'll need to do is just add in a Google icon into this button. And that's actually a pretty straightforward process. If I head up to my visual elements here, I can just select from our icons. I'll drag an icon into our group. And then within our icon library, you can just type in the word Google and you'll see that there is a G here. I'll also remove the style of that because I would like to update the color of this. So if I scroll on up to the icon color, I'm just going to make that white as well. And then I'll just move that up a tad in my group, move it over to the side. And then I can do the same with my text next to it. And then finally, I can make sure the width of this button is the same as the button above it. And just collapse the height there. And now what you'll see is that we've created a button on our page. And when a user clicks into this, we'd like to allow them to sign in through our Google authentication experience. And so in order to build out that workflow, we're just going to select on the group itself. And now with group elements, whenever any element that sits within the group is clicked, it's also going to trigger the same workflow. So that's why groups normally work as an alternative to buttons. So I'm going to select the group and choose to start a workflow every single time this group is clicked. And within this workflow, what I'd like to do is just type in the word social. And then I'm going to choose the sign up / login with a social network option. And then I'll be prompted to choose an authentication provider, which in our case today, it's going to be Google. And it's at this step in our workflow that a user is going to be redirected through to the Google authentication page. But once a user is redirected back, we can add in any additional steps to this workflow we'd like. And in my case, once a user's registered an account, I'd like to redirect them through to a settings page I have in my application. So I'm just going to choose to add an additional step. I'll select from the navigation option and select the go to page workflow. And now I'll just set the destination page to be my settings page. And the reason I'm sending a user through to my settings page is because on that settings page, I would like to display the data of the user's Google account that we can pull through our API key. So on this page, I just have some blank input fields here. But within these fields, I'd like to display the user's Google account information. So in the name field here, the way I can do that is by adding in some initial content. And I can choose to display the current users. And then you'll see an option to pull data from their Google account. And then I'll choose to display their first name. If I'd also like to add in their last name, I can add a space and then insert more dynamic data. And once again, display the current user, their Google information, their last name. And then the last thing I want to show you is just the profile photo. So for the dynamic image here, I'm going to insert dynamic data and select from the current user, their Google data, their profile picture. And that's all that's required in order to actually extract information from a user's Google account. Let's jump on over into our registration page now and take a preview at what this whole experience looks like. Over in the preview of my application, I'm just viewing my registration page. One thing I'd like to point out though is that if we're previewing this page, we're just going to need to make sure that we actually remove the debugger URL parameter. Just because if we were to choose to log into our Google account and we were sent from the URL that contains our debugger string, it's not going to match with the URL that we've added in the actual developer console itself. So I'm going to remove that parameter and then reload the page. And then once the page is reloaded, I'm going to select our sign up with Google button here. And that's going to redirect us through to our Google account here. And then I will select to log in with my account, which has been pre-approved within my developer console. And then I'll be redirected back through to my Bubble application once it's validated my account. And now you can see it's displaying my Google account data within my input field here, as well as my picture element. And just like that, you can see how easy it is to add your own Google authentication experience into your app, and then start to display a user's data from their Google account within your own Bubble application. And that's everything I wanted to cover throughout today's tutorial. If you'd like to stay in the know of any other video tutorials or guides that I share, be sure to hit that subscribe button below so you can be the first to know when I release a new video. Until then, I wish you all the best on your own no-code journey.